Sear, our non-stimulant, thermogenic, and recomposition agent. Sear is a super cool product because it's going to help you utilize turning your white adipose tissue, which is for storage of fat, into brown adipose tissue, which is going to help with energy production. So this is great to use for a competition prep or in your weight loss phase. So you can stack it with a stimulant-based thermogenic, or you could also use it in your off-season or muscle building phase to help keep you lean and mean. Sear.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Pro Physique Code. Today we're going to have a good topic. We got Lexi, we got Evan, and we're going to tell you how effed up your peak week plan is.
Yeah, we got some good ones to share.
It's
Unless
not
it's one
a
of
good
ours and it's perfect.
Well, not good, but like good in the sense of entertaining. We'll put it that way.
to be fair, I don't think people that are happy are going to send us a peak week plan.
No.
Right? And here, I'll give you my peak week plans. Like, I'll be happy to share them because they're not specific to anyone. So I think people that are generally happy with their peak week or happy with their experience aren't going to send me stuff. So I'm getting stuff from unhappy people. And a lot of that happiness comes down to, I had a girl at Junior Nationals. Actually, she was a pro. She reached out to me while I was at the show because she found out that her and another girl with completely different builds had the exact same nutrition plan, the same training plan, the same peak week plan. And that frustrated her. And then, short answers from her coach and don't question my methods, that kind of stuff. So I think the ones that I did get were wonderful because as sometimes silly as I think peak week plans can be, these, obviously we're not going to say names, but you guys can infer, you know who the bad coaches are. But there's some that I've never heard of, but just some of the funny stuff that I'm like, because we got to have a reason for doing things.
Right.
So I'd like to know the reason. So you guys are going to laugh at some of these, like,
That's always my question is like, what is the reason for some of these things? I had someone ask me, they told me that their coach said, let me pull it up. They said that their coach told them, this is one I had never heard of. They said that their coach said something about that they couldn't have, okay, so she asked if we could touch on whether frozen fish or fresh fish, like non-frozen fish, makes a difference. Because I guess her previous coach told her that if you buy fish frozen, it can cause you to hold water. And I was like, I have never heard that one before, but
I mean, I guess if it's frozen, maybe it's soaked in preservatives. I don't know, but that would be on the package. And why would you change your source of food in peak week? So there's the problem.
right. And honestly, I mean, so I think especially if you're buying like food in bulk, especially protein sources, a lot of times, like with fish, you may buy it frozen just to, so it doesn't go bad. But I've never heard that one before. So that
some of the highest quality foods that you get and you order online come frozen. They have to ship it somehow.
Yeah. If it's fresh frozen, then it's fine.
Yeah.
Again, and so we'll get into the discussion on why this happened. So I believe the person that coined the term peak week for bodybuilding, because there's peak weeks for other sports, right? Like runners, and they do all that stuff. Powerlifting. I think it got kind of turned into a term for bodybuilding. I believe Dr. Joe was the one that coined it in the 80s. I could be wrong, but I think he mentioned that to me. And then he immediately regretted it. And, the reason being is that people assume that peak week is when something magical happens, right?
Yeah.
Whereas first things first, if you're not ready a week out, sorry, peak week's not going to fix anything.
Yeah, I think that's where we have to start. I think you're so right. I feel like the biggest misconception is that, and honestly, I'll be honest, like I feel like I was kind of guilty of thinking this when I first started competing, that like you hear the term peak week and you think like all this craziness is going to happen in a span of a week. And honestly, I think that's where that's where the misconception lies. I mean, if you're not ready before peak week, good luck being ready by show day, right? Like you should be ready by peak week, and peak week should just kind of be a matter of, as you always say, Paul, fine tuning the Ferrari.
Yeah, look, in a perfect world, absolutely. That's the case with it. The perfect world, we have enough time, everybody's ready early, and you can peak someone up really, really nicely. Sometimes it's just trying to do the best you can with what you have.
Yeah.
I mean, every situation is different with that. I take every thing I get with a grain of salt with certain people too. Like if they send a peak week plan and it may not be the highest in food, and they're like, my food wasn't high, I need my glycogen stores full. I'm like, well, were you ready to? Or are they trying to just there's a bunch of different factors that kind of play into things, but there has to be a reason why you do something. There has to be a reason.
Yeah, and that's the biggest thing, because you can, in any isolated thing, like you said, high carbs, low carbs, high sodium, low sodium, anything in isolation can look or sound bad, but it's specific to the person.
Yeah.
And that's where we run into the problem with, if two people are on the exact same peak week plan, or here's my other favorite. Oh, I've been with my coach for 3 years. Cool. What's peak week like? Oh, it's always the same. I'm like, I've never, and I mean, honestly, back-to-back peak weeks are even different. So you're changing some variable.
Yeah.
I've never had peak week be exactly the same for any
Right.
client. Like for even like mock peaks to actual peak week, it changes.
Right.
And if we do multiple shows, very rarely are they the same. Very rarely.
Yeah. A few years ago, I've peaked Lexi. I have never peaked you, Evan, but I started sending out an actual questionnaire before peak week because I wanted to learn, because what I realized was I would sometimes have people eat something and they're like, oh, coach, I haven't eaten that in a while. And I was like, oh, well, I need to know that. So now I ask what foods you eat on a regular basis, because, I want to make sure digestion, all these things are in order.
Yeah. And I think I know you used to, I think you probably still do this. Like you even ask, what is your normal breakfast meal? And I would assume that's because you try to keep like breakfast on show day very similar to what like somebody's normal breakfast is. Cause I think that the body usually adapts to that long term. And that's usually when digestion thrives the best, rather than if you're waking up on show day eating something like drastically different for your first meal, or not having your coffee. That can sometimes throw things off.
Oh, a headache. So I used to
Mhm.
get a lot of clients be like, coach, I have a headache. And I'd be like, well, what'd you do different? Well, I haven't had my coffee. I'd be like, why? Well, it wasn't on the plan. I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah. And
That,
I
yeah.
think coffee helps a lot of people too, like with going to the bathroom in the morning. So like a little bit of coffee with food and then movement. And so if you just throw that out completely on show day morning, that could, definitely throw off your digestion.
My question is, if I get questions like that, right? Like, hey, can I have my coffee? And if it's not on the week plan or anything like that, I'll say, what do you normally do? We'll have
Yeah.
12 ounces of coffee. Okay, 12 ounces is not a big deal. We can have 12. I was like, or 8 ounces. Let's not go drink a 24-ounce coffee this morning. Like, let's be a little
Yeah,
smart with that. But
that's part of the instructions I give is my idea for peak week is I want to remove as many variables as possible, right? I want sodiums, fluids, most things the same. I want to bring down inflammation and add to fullness, but with a very shredded athlete. So I'm not trying to lose body fat the last couple days. I'm trying to make the muscles pop and keep everything tight. So peak week, I think the term peak week can intimidate some people into believing what they were told to do.
Right.
They can go, oh, this is I heard bodybuilding's hard. I heard about peak week. Okay, some real magic's going to happen. Whereas if you've done peaking wrong, which Evan, it sounds like you have, you've definitely waken up on show day and been like, oh shit, what's wrong, right? Versus when you do peaking in a very kind of, I don't know, consistent manner, you just wake up every day in a very predictable look, and you know what you're going to look like, and you sleep better because you're not stressed. And it's like all this stuff has a downstream positive effect.
Yeah. And I think going back to what you just said a second ago, Paul, how like peak week is not a time where you're going to drop a ton of body fat. But if you're listening to this and you're wondering, because I think, it does happen. I think it happens with a lot of our athletes. You'll see, not always, but you'll see people dropping weight throughout the week. But that's usually just more so inflammation. That's usually because.
Yeah, I'm not saying the scale didn't go down. The scale can drop. I've got girls that when they travel, they don't realize how much stress they have at home with the kids and a dog and a husband and a job. And they go to the hotel that first night and then no one wakes them up and they'll drop 3-4 pounds. And they're like, coach, I slept 8 hours. And I'm like, yeah, that's the inflammation.
Hilarious.
And that's also going to build a little confidence, right? Because they love seeing the lower number, but it's not like they lost 4 pounds of body fat overnight. They just dropped some inflammation.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. And a lot of times it can be a sign that your body's burning through all the food you're using too, which is great. But another big misconception I think people have is if they are in condition, and you can't really necessarily predict if the scale is going to go up or down with it. But in a peak week situation, the scale shouldn't necessarily go up a bunch either. Like people think, oh, I'm
No,
filling out, the scale should go up. It's like, no, 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 no. We don't want that. We
no.
don't want that. We want it. And typically things should go down in
Yeah,
peak
and
week as
so
food goes up.
we'll talk about peaking as I kind of come to my philosophy behind it. You guys are very well aware of it. But we'll talk a little bit about those details and how I came to those conclusions. We'll talk a little bit about different ways I've peaked in the past and, you know, some variables I've used with athletes. But I want to dig into some of the peak week plans that I was sent. Because I think it's just awareness around the sport. Most people, when they come into the sport, they come in through a very small peephole, right? They know somebody at the gym, they saw a girl on the internet, and that's the only thing they know, and that's what they focus on. And so what we're trying to do is just honestly raise athletes' awareness so that they can be better at kind of being their own advocate, asking the right questions, wondering why things happen. That's how you become a better bodybuilder. If your coach cannot answer a question, if their response is, I have this many pro cards, this is my experience. Listen, I could say those things too, but I will never say that. I will explain why I do things because I have to understand why I do them. Otherwise, I'd feel odd putting someone through that protocol, right?
Right.
And look, I come from, I played football at University of Georgia and ran track there too. And I've always looked at coaching like teaching. If you can tell someone why you're doing something,
Right.
the buy-in is so much greater than saying, hey, I'm smarter, you just do this. I know more than you do this.
Yeah.
It's derogatory and it doesn't help. Like help your athletes gain confidence in you as a coach by providing you with the information they fucking ask for.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry for
Amen.
cussing.
And I think a big part of peak week too, and we can talk about this at the end, but like is managing your stress. And I can imagine like if I was an athlete and I got a peak week from my coach and it didn't make any sense or it seemed a little off and I asked a question and the answer was like, well, don't ask questions. I have this many pro cards. Like I think that would stress me out as an athlete too. And I can imagine that like I'm somebody who's very sensitive to stress. Like when I'm lean, I feel like it shows on my body really easily. And I think that's the case for a lot of people. And I don't feel like that does not help at all come peak week either.
Not at all. And I think that's, you know, I think most athletes at least will like for a show or two buy into that. Oh, okay. So, and then if they don't do well and they're not getting the feedback and they feel like they're being a burden, that's when they're going to start looking around and going on the Google search and maybe they find coaches like us that openly talk about this stuff, because that's the other thing. I don't know many coaches that openly talk about how they do peak week. You can go on YouTube and type in Paul Ravella linear load and it explains literally my philosophies on peak week. So I don't know a lot of coaches that are doing that.
No, I
I'll
mean,
post every peak week I've ever put together online. I don't care.
Yeah. No, my one of my big goals for this sport is to win the Olympia and then just post the peak week plan, because I think everyone would be like bull crap.
right.
Like,
Well,
that's still the knock. You can't do this without this. You can't do this without. I mean, listen to Laura Lee, talk about her peak week. They don't change anything. They just cruise into the show.
my favorite is, and I'm sure you guys get this a lot. My favorite is when I'll have a client tell me like, hey, Lexi, oh my gosh, I was backstage and people were looking at me so weird as I had like, as I was drinking my water, as I was eating my rice cakes or whatever it was. And, I'll have people tell me all the time, oh yeah, I was, and like, even for bikini girls, they'll say, oh yeah, I heard so-and-so say like she hadn't, drank any water that day, or she had only had like 8 ounces of water since last night. I'm like, oh, that's just crazy. And like, it's sad that those things still go on because these are things I hear very frequently and I've heard recently too.
Yeah, well, and we'll explain why it's crazy, because you say it's crazy, but girls are like, well, why is that crazy?
Yeah, right.
So for those that aren't familiar, muscle is about 70 to 80% water. So when you take a diuretic, yes, you're losing water out of all tissues in your body. That doesn't magically come out from underneath your skin. So yes, if you have a little extra body fat, you might look a little bit tighter for temporarily, but over time, you're going to look smaller and smaller. And then if the show starts and you go to pump up and you can't get a vein, that's because blood volume is low and you're not going to get that pump. And then you might start getting cramps and like you might get dizzy because how many times have we heard girls passing out in the makeup chair because, so water is not the difference between winning and losing a show, right? So
No. I
It can
mean,
definitely be the difference between losing if you don't have enough.
Mhm.
But
absolutely. I mean, just put it into perspective this way too, and we can talk more about this, but like imagine if you're going into the gym, you're dehydrated, you don't have any water in your system, getting a pump and like seeing that muscle fullness is going to be really hard, right? So like imagine if you're doing that before going on the stage, it's not going to yield your best look.
yeah, yeah. So
Imagine,
go ahead.
imagine being hungover from drinking and then going in and trying to get a pump. Are you going to get a pump? No, you're dehydrated as hell. It's not going to happen.
Damn tequila.
Yep.
All right. I don't know. I've got so many of them. I thought this is my favorite because there's a couple different things that I noticed with the peak week plans I've been sent. Some are literally in notes. Like here is, meal 1,
Okay.
1.25 scoops protein shake. Meal 2, same thing. Meal 3, same thing. Meal 4, 5-ounce chicken rice. Meal 5, 5-ounce chicken rice. Okay. So that's one way. The other way is where it looks like a lot of information and it looks very organized, but this is my favorite one. Friday, reduce water intake to 1 gallon and complete it by 1 p.m. Drink 1 ounce with each meal after that, up to prejudging. Okay, so junior nationals prejudging for bikini, the pros didn't go on until 7 p.m. This team has pros on it. So that girl was going to have 12, 17 hours and whatever, 7 ounces of water. After, by the way, loading 2 gallons of water a day. So if you guys aren't familiar, a very common theme is load water early in the week, 2 gallons. And if you've ever tried to drink 2 gallons of water, that's 130 ounces, 260 ounces of water. I tried it before. I literally had to keep a 20-ounce thing at my desk all day, and I was peeing every 15 minutes. I'm like, woohoo. So as soon as you pull that and reduce it, the hormones to expel water are super upregulated. So now you're going to lose water even faster. So on a normal day, if you only have 7 ounces of water, you'd probably be a little bit better. But when you've been pounding it like that, your body's upregulating it. Also, Hydrovax, which is I had to look it up, it's a diuretic. So you're not only are you doing 1 ounce of water, you're also taking a diuretic. And this is the day before the show.
People understand the way diuretics work is you have to have water to flush, right? Like that's how they work too.
Yeah, they're for medical purposes, for keeping people alive that have heart conditions, that are on drugs, that are starting to store water. The only time I've ever even thought about using diuretics is when I have girls like on their cycle in peak week and we wanted to use it. And what typically happens is, we keep the water the same. We drop a little bit of sodium and take a diuretic, but honestly, it overcorrects. Like I had to like bring the water back in and add the sodium back in. So, there are times where this is just a general peak week plan that everybody on this team got. Because this was written a week out. So that's more like a conversation I would have with an athlete like the week of the show. Like, hey coach, I got my cycle. What can we do? I'll say, hey, cut your sodium in half. Let's take a diuretic or even an Epsom salt bath, because I prefer pulling water out of the skin. I think it's more predictable than diuretics. Here's my favorite part of this. Eat 3 prunes. At 10 p.m., drink hot water with olive oil.
Makes me want to gag just thinking hot water with olive oil.
Why does it have to be hot?
I would assume, like, if I had to rationalize the prunes, the hot water, and the olive oil, I'm assuming it's the coach's way of trying to, like, create a natural laxative to get the client to go to the bathroom. But
Okay. Hey, listen, I can accept that because that is one of the benefits. Hot fluids do help.
yeah,
Okay.
I mean, I just don't know. Like, for me personally, and I think this is most people, especially if you're eating that, let's say 10 p.m. right before you go to bed. At least for me, I'm gonna probably still be digesting that by the morning, right? And like, I don't think that's a good thing either. But yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I guess if you've tested that before, that's one thing. But if that's just like a random thing that was put into your peak week plan, I would ask questions if you've never done that before.
Yeah. This one's funny. It says, after the show, drink a gallon of water. Don't have a cheat meal high in salt. This will make you retain fluids and can cause pain. Can also cause, heart issues. That's wild. You're also going to look way better on Sunday after you do all that water.
Right. Well, I want to go back to, so you mentioned, just to clarify, did you say on this meal plan, it literally had them eating or having a scoop and a quarter of protein for like
Oh,
the,
this is a different one. This one's
Now,
okay.
the only thing I could even consider with that one is someone cut their sodium hard on Thursday and Friday, and then on Saturday it's drink water and don't do a lot of sodium, because that would overcorrect a crazy amount with that. That's the only way I could even consider why they would.
Yeah, I actually
Obviously,
think that's actually good advice after the show. You don't want to go crazy with
yeah,
them. Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that, because they probably had some issues previously and said,
yeah.
be careful, because you can really get edema and some issues there with your heart.
Mhm.
Especially
Or
if diuretics were used or sodium was cut. And
there was diuretics used and sodium was cut. I mean, that's
yeah,
what's on
that's
this
fine.
plan.
Yeah, that's
I
fine.
don't know how powerful Hydrovax is. It's probably an over-the-counter one. It's not going to be like Lasix, the one that, that gets prescribed by doctors. Yeah. So it's just, again, and in isolation, this looks bad, but this is everybody's peak week plan. There's not a name on here. You know what I'm saying? So this isn't like for this client in this specific situation, this is what we're doing. Ask other girls on your team, say, hey, does your peak week plan look like mine? Or ask guys,
I was just going to recommend that. I think that if you are questioning, and I think we've said this before with like some of the meal plans that we were talking about a couple weeks ago, if you do suspect that you're getting something very cookie cutter, not specified to you, it's not like it's against the rules to like compare, ask a friend on the team or ask a teammate, what does your peak week look like? I've heard awful scenarios where people find out that everybody on their team is like literally eating the same meal plan, regardless of if they're bikini, if they're figure. And honestly, even if you are taking two girls that are in the same division, that does not mean that they're going to have the same meal plan or the same peak week. It may follow.
Every girl has it.
Yeah, everybody's gonna have something different. It may follow like, all three of us, we do linear loading for peak weeks, but that's not to say our peak weeks don't all follow a generalized pattern, but like the numbers, the foods are gonna be drastically different person to person.
Out linear load normally, but depends on someone's travel schedule too. And if they hold water a little bit when they fly, carbs hurt with that too. So maybe we'll load them up more the day before and give them that flying day if they fly in a day to dry out. Like there's not a perfect way to do things. And also, what the main issue with everything with the peak week is everyone's trying to catch this lightning in a bottle, right? They're trying to get the perfect combination of everything, this perfect storm to come together. Now, if it does, it's super impressive. But that is exceedingly rare for that to actually happen. And you can risk like half of your look to try to improve by 5 or 10% and throw an entire work to prep off of that, a whole prep off.
Yeah, and you're not going to be able to maintain that look. So even if you catch lightning in a bottle at prejudging, you might look like crap at finals. So, or vice versa. I've had quite a few girls tell me like, oh, I didn't do well at prejudging, so I just went out and had lunch with my family, and I came back to finals, and the judges were like, damn, if you'd looked like this at prejudging, you would have won. So,
and Paul, I know that we've been to a few shows recently to where everyone looks like they're in shape, and these are pros too up there. They come from specific groups and specific coaches, and they're in shape, but they all have stomach issues with that. All of them.
Oh yeah.
And,
so I got a good one for that.
And if that happens, and everyone is like that from the same coach, it's a peaking issue with that. Try to do too much.
Yeah. So here's one. So her name is Stacy. She said, and she told me to use her name. She said, I was like, I'll keep it anonymous. And she said, no, you can use my name, because she's very unhappy. I won't mention the coach's name. She was told to eat a burger and fries. And she said, I have a gluten sensitivity and a red meat sensitivity. The judge's feedback was mostly to focus on my distended bloating and belly. So and she refused to listen to me, that I shouldn't eat this. I questioned her methods. And when I questioned them, she said, I have this much experience and I know what I'm doing. Yep. So
I cannot imagine being a coach if I prescribed a client a burger and fries and they told me, Lexi, I have a gluten intolerance, I can't tolerate red meat, what in God's green earth would make me think like to still prescribe that for them? That is
Well,
terrible.
I had a client come to me because back in the day when I coached Natalie Matthews, she was one of the first vegans to like openly talk about being a vegan, and she turned pro. And I had a client in Japan who was working with a coach, and he had helped her with her, like, let her use vegan numbers, macros for prep. But during peak week, he gave her a meal plan, and she's like, "Hey, I can't eat this. I don't eat these foods." And he's like, "Just figure it out. Just figure it out." Like, because again, say, copy pasta peak week plans, which, yeah, I mean,
And look here, I'm sorry, Paul.
nah, it's frustrating to me because I feel like, these athletes, I compete, you compete, Lexi, you compete, you work so hard for that moment on stage.
Yeah.
Literally look the worst you've looked in months. When you walk out there, you feel defeated. Like I
And,
think what it scares me is that those people are just never going to come back to the sport because I think that's what the sport is.
Right.
and
Right.
like the thing with like the burger, right? I have had athletes that don't want to do it, but I would never do it on the night before show if we haven't tested it. I've had athletes to be like, no, I don't. I'm like, do you do well with red meat? Do you do well with burgers? Well, sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. I'm not exactly sure. I'm like, if it's 4 or 5 weeks out, I'm like, hey, let's try a refeed with a burger and fry. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it sure as hell doesn't. And guess what? We don't do it again.
Yeah.
We're definitely not doing it on peak week with
Right.
that. But that's
Um,
the time to talk to an athlete and see what works. And if you want to push them out of their comfort zone with it, because sometimes it's just the burger and fries. It's not instant red meat. They're scared to do it.
Yeah.
And sometimes we'll do it and it will work great. Sure, not every time. There's sometimes I've done it, definitely did not work good. And guess what? We just don't do it again.
Actually, the day before your show, Evan, you were
Yeah.
telling me you were having some digestive issues. And I said, man, I'm telling you, a burger would do you so good because
Yep, I did it.
that red meat and the little bit of fat, a lot of people don't realize how valuable fat is for the
Mhm.
digestive system. And if you've been on, the girl that I just spoke to at the pro show in Chattanooga, she was on 168 protein, 13 fat, 0 carbs, and she was a 90 something pound competitor.
oh my gosh.
13 fat. So the digestive system becomes really a mess because it's not, a lot of foods are only fat soluble. So you don't realize, so that the reason I like leaning on that big burger is, and sometimes I won't even do the fries. It's just the red meat, a little bit of grease, a little bit of fat. It just gets things moving. You're not going to store body fat overnight. You're just not. If you're a shredded athlete, if anything, that's going to ramp your metabolism up. You'll get the meat sweats, you're like, I have some athletes that literally drop 2 pounds every time they do a burger the night before the show. They just know they go to the bathroom. It just gets them moving.
Yep.
Brittany Hamilton, she almost always does a burger the night before the show. We've tested it. It works for her. It gets her digestive system humming. Daraja, all the time with the burgers before the show. It just really filled her out and got her digestive system moving. So it's not like we're talking about theories that haven't been tested at the highest level of the sport. It's still individual based, but at no point have I ever had 2 athletes on the same approach, the same exact plan for peaking. Like you said, Evan, sometimes I love my predictable linear loads. That's probably my go-to, especially for a first-time peaking up person. But I also like, and this is something that I don't think a lot of coaches discuss, is show day as a means of testing stuff. Track macros on show day, have a free meal that is not going to make you look like a jerk, like a cheat meal after a show, sushi, a burger, something you're going to digest well, but don't go eat 2 pieces of cake and then, oh, I look watery the next day. I'll actually say, hey, what are your macros at today? Let's do this. Let's see how we look tomorrow. We might look better tomorrow. Now we know we could have looked a little fuller, a little tighter. So it's all data. Show day is still another day for an athlete.
Right.
A perfect example. Like I have a girl at peak week right now for Universe, and she sent her check in this morning. We changed her plan today.
Yeah.
Like it's not always set in stone. I've never sent a peak week out and been like, this is the way it is every step of the way.
Yeah.
Sometimes it never changes.
That's a good point. I'll say this. we do daily check-ins for peak week
Mhm.
and we give feedback. And I'm to the point now that I've been doing this so long. If I write a peak week plan, I know my athletes so well, 99 out of 100, it's going to
Yeah.
stay very similar. We might up or, the day before the show is where most of the changes happen, but I don't tell them the day before the show what the numbers are, give them a window. I say we're going to be between 130 and 190 carb. We're going to be between 40 and 60 fat. And then when I see them, that's when we decide. I get their feedback. So
Mhm.
that's how predictable it's gotten for me, is that I'm literally waiting for that last day. And I will say this, I almost always err on the side of adding more, because it's very hard to fix fullness on show day. It's nerve wracking. They're getting the makeup done. Kelby, who was at Junior Nationals with me, woke up, looked spectacular. Hair, makeup, ran late. I didn't see her until 5 minutes before she walked on stage. She had one meal. She completely flattened out. We ended up dropping, I think, a couple spots in the placings because she was stuck in that makeup chair all morning.
Yep.
So you don't want to be chasing fullness on show day if possible. Sometimes it's unavoidable. But so I typically will err on the side of more fullness the day before.
And a
Yeah.
lot of the times, the way I'll do it too is I will do multiple check-ins. I'll say I need a check-in at fast in the morning and then an hour before the last meal. And I need the body weights at all those times with it too, because then I can track 3 variables. I can track their morning fasted body weight, their weight 1 hour for their final meal, then their weight before bed. And then the next morning when I get their weight, I know how much water they're excreting throughout the night based on the food, and we can work a plan up. And if later on in the day, look, 2 days out from the show, if we get up an hour for the last meal, they're 2 pounds lighter and they woke up in the morning, which happens, then we need to add some food in that last meal.
Yeah.
Or else they're going to wake up flat as a board in the morning.
Oh,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah,
Night
I like
before
to
the
do
show,
that as
check.
well.
I'll definitely at Universe, I'll be in my athletes' rooms after they're done checking in, getting one more look at them to see if because I'll see them in the gym in the morning, and then I'll see them before bed. And if they've flattened out a little bit, we'll add another meal. That's absolutely. But
it's easier to fix problems before they happen than try to fix them later.
Yeah, show day can be so hectic, especially at a show like Nationals. Like,
yeah,
not for nothing, it is the most hectic of all the national shows. The backstage area is very tiny. It's a very aggressive staff with everybody line up, get here, you feel on edge almost all day.
Yeah, at Universe, there's a lot of standing backstage for hours.
Yeah, they line you up for an hour.
Mm-hmm.
But you're just waiting. So, now that I've been going to that show so many years, I tend to tell my girls hey, they're telling you line up bikini C. They're still on wellness A. Go relax. So sometimes I try as a coach to bring their calmness on show day down.
Yeah.
By running around. Because even I'm like, oh my God, they're calling for glazing for bikini A. They still haven't even finished figure. They got to do wellness. And I'm like, girls, take a deep breath. Yeah.
Right. I feel like if there's one thing I've learned, it's that, I mean, God love them, the people backstage, they obviously they keep everything organized, but sometimes they'll say something and, obviously listen to them, but a lot of times it's like that hurry up and wait, right? Like you're pressed for that sense of urgency and you think you need to, get glazed, be in line. And then, like you said, Paul, they may still be on, they may just be starting the division before you. So yeah, if you can relax and I think also one of the nice things, I know a lot of shows are, well, I don't want to say a lot, but I know that several shows now have an app or something.
Yeah, the muscle wear where you get the text messages.
Yeah, where you can actually
that can be a little bit dicey though. It can say bikini A, come downstairs or something, and meanwhile bikini A is lining up. So
yeah.
Okay, then that is a little
the
sketchy.
best thing you can do is get the live stream. Live stream.
I was gonna say the biggest hack ever is buy the live stream. And if that's what I did when I got my pro card at Universe, I decided to go over to the venue when they were halfway through Classic Physique. Yeah. That's when I left because I knew if I went before that, they were going to be rushing to line me up backstage. I was going to get worried. My anxiety was going to go through the roof. And I was like, no, I know I'm not going to miss my class because I'm watching the live stream right now. Right. And I know how many classes we have before I even going to go.
Well, I like how, I wish more shows did this, but I like how Tampa Pro, they actually have well, it's not really backstage, but in the backstage area for athletes, they have the TVs up where you can actually watch the show live. You don't have to purchase the live stream. And I think that's always really helpful just for the athlete to be able to see exactly who's on stage and kind of a tentative time of when you're going to go on stage.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. I mean, the show experience is always going to impact your mindset and all those things. It's rush, rush, rush. Then you're on stage before you know it, and you got to slow everything down. So a lot of that comes down to experience, visualizing what it's going to be like. But that's also a game day coach. Like, you know, we have been in that experience, in that spot as athletes. I've been yelled at before, and I don't like it. So I can help my athletes a little bit on that side of it. And I've also been backstage with, you know, at these shows where you just feel frazzled. It's hard to explain. Like you just don't know what's going on. And then there's some shows where you just feel like it's such a calm day. Everything goes so easy. All the class shows always feel so smooth because Florida shows in general have the same stage hands. Like, you know, we all know Billy, you know,
Yep.
he's backstage at every show, and he knows how to like make people laugh, and you know, he
He's
knows,
the best. Yeah,
yeah,
he's awesome.
he's great. So like that's what I mean. Like, and then, you know, sometimes I think the people that are backstage at shows are told, hey, you need a lot. They've never competed before. They've never been in the athlete's shoes. So they're doing what they're told. They don't understand that they're elevating everybody's stress levels by a few degrees.
Right.
So, you know, I can see their perspective. They're doing what they're told. But that's where being an experienced athlete, they'll stay calmer. You know, Maria last year when she turned pro at Universe, gosh, that had to be her 5th national show. She was so calm on show day. Even Danielle the year before when she turned pro, I asked her how she was feeling all day. I heard from her once. She was in her room watching the live stream. She did not come down. She was in bikini E. She didn't even come downstairs until like bikini A was getting ready to go on because she knew each class is 20, 30 minutes, you know. So, and she just was going through the motions. Like it was a very calm day for her. And I asked her, you know, and I've heard this many times. How did you feel on show day? Just at ease. No, you know, the other side of that coin is getting, you know, 15, 20 text messages from a client. Hey, what time should it be? Can I eat this? Should I do that? Not that I want to get text messages, don't get me wrong, but you can tell when a client is like, they're stressing themselves out, trying to micromanage every little detail.
Yes. Absolutely. As you always say, Paul, you have to be a diva on show day. Be a diva.
Diva.
You know,
You're a bride. I try to treat all my athletes like brides. Everything's great. The world is perfect.
right.
Um,
Right.
Like if I don't like their makeup and it's 10 minutes before the stage, oh, I fucking love your makeup. It's so good. When they walk off the stage, I'm like, what happened with your makeup? Well, you said it was good. I said, listen, I can't tell you it's bad 10 minutes before you walk out on stage. That's all you're gonna think about.
Right. Right.
Like, yeah, I'm everything is hunky dory. We'll sort it out after. You know, there's nothing worse than a frazzled competitor. You can just see it on their face when they walk out on stage.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You can see it in their face. You can see it in just their like their demeanor and their confidence in the way they move their body. And I mean, if you can tell that from, you know, from the audience, the judges are absolutely going to pick up on that.
Yeah.
Something I wanted to touch on too, because I got a question about this and I think we can kind of answer it, would be because for a lot of people, not everybody, but for a lot of people, they're getting more and more food, specifically carbohydrates as the week goes on. So I had somebody ask like how to navigate that and to mitigate as much like stomach distension, because obviously as food goes up when you're eating more, there's always the risk if you're eating the wrong things or the wrong types of foods to get that stomach distension, especially, you know, for people who may be overly conditioned and may need to fill out pretty aggressively. So I want to talk a little bit about that too, about how we navigate that with our clients.
Take it
I
away.
think I think you answered the question already. It's typically a digestion issue with that. And don't worry about what your stomach looks like at the end of the night. Worry about what it looks like the next morning when everything is digested. If food is sitting in your stomach, it's a digestion issue more than a food issue. So eat foods that you're used to eating and foods that you know you digest well. A lot of times too, if your food needs to go up, if you have a lot of carbs, you can't make that all white rice, right? That's going to be a lot of volume in there. So some more calorie dense options can be good if you need higher food because they just take up less stomach space.
Right. I feel like peak week is the time, at least I tell my athletes this, and this is something like I practice on my own, is I love vegetables. I do, but peak week is usually a time where I will say that's kind of the one time you can get away with just like having a lot less veggies and a lot less volume in general. So you want to think about how, like for example, how do you feel digestion wise after you consume a big, large salad, right? Compared to if you have cream of rice or something like honey or rice cakes, right? Obviously, rice cakes, the honey are going to make you just feel a lot less full, but that's usually what you want to go for when it comes to peak week, especially if your carbs are walking up. You want those things that are going to be a lot denser by nature, a lot easier to digest, a lot lower in fiber, just to keep your stomach as flat as possible while you're pushing all that food in.
And honestly, like I'm not even a big fan of rice cakes for the most part on high
Really?
volumes leading into it. Like, first of all, they're brown rice. They don't digest quite as good. And it's I find that it bloats more people than anything when you start eating a lot of them.
Oh yeah, I
Like
mean, if you're
one here and there for sure. Backstage, like 2 rice cakes and some peanut butter or some salt. Sure, that's
They're like
fine.
the easiest food to bring to a show because they don't go bad. You
Yeah.
can eat them without any effort.
right.
My other go-to is often cereal, like a high
Yeah.
sugar
Mhm.
cereal. Yeah.
Cereal, yeah. I love like the caramel rice cakes. I never do plain rice cakes on show day, but caramel rice cakes, like you get just the little bit of extra sugar in them too, just digest so well with
Yeah.
me.
It's
Love those.
the psychopathic competitors that we are. I know the difference in carbs between all the, I know caramel is 11 carbs and
It is.
lightly salted is 7. Like
7.
Yep.
we're cuckoo.
12.
Yeah. I do remember Danny Patterson. She turned pro at Universe and it just brought that memory up. She ate 2 sleeves of rice cakes on show day. They just, every time I would have her eat a couple, 3 or 4, she would look better. And I'd say, eat, 3 or 4. Like, I just kept seeing her and she's like, I'm like, just keep eating them, keep eating. Like, we ended up eating like 22 rice cakes on show day, I think, but she looked amazing. She actually got to the center for the overall and, almost won it. So like, but for her, it was,
Mhm.
we had done a couple shows and we knew it worked well for her.
Yeah.
But the caramel ones, that's why it made me think of that. But I think of caramel rice cakes as literally like Apple Jacks. It's basically
Me
kid
too.
cereal.
Me too. Yeah, they're so good. It's like honestly, I mean, even year round, but especially deep into prep, they literally taste like candy to me. But they've always been like a go-to. I think everybody has their like one or two foods that they know just digest super well, kind of their go-to carb source on show day. And that's always just been one for me.
Yeah.
I know, Paul, like we're a big fan of like Pop Tarts too. I think they're super smart on show
I
day
think
for
they're a little
people.
underrated, especially the brown sugar. I think if I'm not mistaken, the macros are like for 2 is 72 or 3 carb and like 8 fat. I mean,
Mhm.
that's hard to get that much carbs with that low of fat, and they digest super well. Like for
In
me,
that low volume.
yeah, yeah,
Like you're talking, those are done in 8
yeah,
bites,
yeah,
and you get 78, almost 80 grams of carbs in
yeah.
that.
And again, it's another food that's really easy to transport because that's
Yep.
important on show day. When people are like, I usually eat fish 3 meals a day. I'm like, listen, show day fish is going to be a mother effer. Like it sucks. I try to get them to do lean ground beef or lean turkey on show day just because it's just such an easier food to like transport and but
Right.
that's something to consider too, is you got to be backstage with your foods. So like, cream of rice might be a little bit tougher because you need some water, you need a microwave.
Yeah, for sure. I like honey too. I feel like honey or like full
Mhm.
sugar jam is
Yeah.
also another, I mean, just so dense. I never have honey because I'm like, oh, I don't want all my carbs going that tiny little serving, but I think it can be very, very helpful, especially backstage. Again, easy to transport, very like no fiber. It's going to digest very quickly and just an easy means of of just carbs if you need it.
And a
Yeah.
little honey goes a long way. I mean,
Yeah.
it's the carb per like gram of honey is not super high like most people would think it is with that, but it's a great source because number one, if water is reduced a little bit, it can help as a binder. It can help things digest a little bit easier and kind of wet up the food a little bit. Because look, we don't want drinking. Most people don't want to drink a gallon of water on show day, right? Like this is a lot of fluids and going to the bathroom and all the other issues with that. So your mouth's gonna get a little dry at points with that, and having a little bit foods that are easier to get down, and honey can really, really help with that.
Yes, absolutely. I feel like I got a couple of other good questions too that I thought we could hit on, like just peak week in general. Let me pull them up really quick. Oh, let's talk a little bit about salt. That's what I wanted to touch on because I don't think we've talked like specifically about that yet, unless I'm like going crazy. Because I got a lot of questions about on my little question box I did about Peak Week about people just asking. We've touched on water, but let's talk a little bit about sodium because I feel like that is another common thing that you hear about in these like old school bodybuilding bro style Peak Weeks of like cutting sodium out or
All the peak week plans that I just had literally said no salt, don't add salt. So yeah, I think it's going to have a huge impact on the body when you change sodium levels, whether you increase it or decrease it. Our bodies regulate sodium by the hour. You know, Lane Norton famously, you know, years ago when I first started competing in bodybuilding, he talked about this all the time, about this idea of changing sodium levels drastically and how much it can impact you. Sodium is part of the electrical system of the body that makes the heart beat. So when you hear about bodybuilders dying the day of the show, the day before, the day after, oftentimes it's from an arrhythmia associated with huge changes in sodium and fluids, because the heart is a muscle. And so you can imagine like a little bit of problem with your heart muscle, bye-bye. Like that's pretty sensitive. So not only just does messing with sodium and water change your physique for the worse, fuck that, you can literally die. I don't think bikini competitors as a whole, they're more going to pass out type of thing. You know, that's where you hear about girls passing out in chairs and stuff, or getting dizzy when they stand up on show day.
Yeah.
But that's where the conversation has to start. Like, okay, how aggressive are you going to be with changing these variables if they're going to have detrimental effects, like life altering effects, not just your physique.
Right, right. And again, it kind of goes back to like what I said at the beginning when we talked about water. I know like one of the biggest things I'll tell my clients if they're telling me like, hey, Lexi, you know, whether it's a contest prep client or not, like, hey, Lexi, I'm having a hard time getting a pump in the gym. I'll say, hey, add a little bit of sodium to your pre-workout meal. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. And then they do it and they're like, whoa, my pump was so much better. And I know that's something like I do. So consider if you're not having sodium before you go on stage, I mean, good luck getting a pump. I know I wouldn't be able to get a pump if I didn't have sodium. I know, Paul, you always have us do the pickles before stage, and I love that.
We'll talk about it. I mean, we'll get into the details of, you know, what sodium actually does. I think the water gets a bad rap. I think that's in this sport, especially. You're watery. No, you had 10 more pounds to go.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Body fat looks like water under the skin.
Yep.
So
there's very few people who are truly peeled that look watery. Very, very few.
it's impossible. Like it's only way it's possible is really with a female with their cycle. But like, you know, I came from the world of natural bodybuilding. If you're shredded, you cannot mess that up. You can be flatter or fuller, but you're always peeled. There's no watery. It's a misnomer.
And like when you have a bikini client, like I remember at Pittsburgh Pro, Brittany Hamilton told you, Paul, and I remember being in the room, she said she felt watery. And like,
Yeah,
we both looked at her, we're like, I don't know what you're talking about, but she felt watery. But like when you are truly peeled, even if you feel watery, I feel like it doesn't look as visible to the eye as maybe you think it does.
Yeah.
So yeah, honestly, I feel like people potentially being watery, I feel like that more so can be more impacted by just them not managing their stress well. Like somebody who just stresses themselves out, I feel like that leads to more potential of like the physique looking watery than anything like water or sodium manipulation does.
Yeah, or it's inflammation, right? It's people that are exhausted. Like some people will look a little watery if they compete too long because their body's exhausted. They're not watery. It's just a ton of inflammation. Their body's fighting them at that point.
Yeah.
Well, it's not even necessarily. Well, they may be holding a little water because of that, but
inflammation is edema. It will put some water in some weird places. So inflammation will make you look puffier. And usually what's, you know, you're going to laugh. Usually when a client on show day or the day before tells me they feel watery, it's because they're flat and they haven't had enough water and food and they're just not popping. So that's really where the word watery, especially the feedback, because every athlete's heard that. You just had a little water under the skin. I promise you, it's body fat. And the thing about dehydrating the body, there are, like, because the way Evan explained it earlier, there is a place where water is going down and body fat cells will actually get a little bit smaller. So you will look better temporarily if you have a little bit of body fat. However, it's going to keep going, and then your muscle cells are going to match that. And so the body keeps that gradient of fluid in the muscle, out of the muscle, under the skin, the same. It's working very hard to keep that because that's what keeps us alive. So you might catch you might time it just right at 1 hour of the day, but who knows if that's the hour you're going to get on stage.
Yeah. And Paul, here's what we were talking about too, like in the art of peaking, because there is art to certain parts of this stuff, right? And understanding what people are getting across. So if someone says, hey, I feel watery, then that's why we have so much data. That's why we have pictures. That's why we have body weights. That's why I take it multiple times a day. Because if their weight is very low or lower than it normally is, and they say they're watery, they're not watery, they're flat.
Yeah.
So that's where it's taking all the data and be able to decipher what the data actually means. So it's taking the information from the client and taking your data and understanding your client and where they are at their journey, where their knowledge base is, taking that and deciphering it into what needs to be done.
So I'll explain a little bit about, so when I send the questionnaire for peaking, another one of the questions is, track your average daily fluid intake.
Mm-hmm.
And that includes all fluids, not just water. If you drink something with water in it, that counts. Okay. I know some people think that like coffee and diet sodas are diuretics. They're not. You actually take in fluids from that. So you're tracking that. You're also tracking your daily sodium intake. That's very hard to predict. So even if you go, yeah, I was on 3,500 milligrams of sodium, the easiest way to keep that the same is to eat the same food, seasoned the same way. And I'll typically have my clients keep their sodium exactly the same every day, their water exactly the same every day. And if there's going to be a change, it's going to be usually carbohydrates, fats, maybe a little bit of sodium, but the sodium will naturally go up when the food goes up.
Mm-hmm.
Sodium transports glycogen to the muscles. So if you think you're going to be able to cut sodium, cut water, eat carbs, and have it go anywhere but your stomach, you're wrong. That's why, like that client just said, not client, she's not even a client of mine, she just sent me her peak week plan. Her feedback was her stomach was distended. Yeah, she had no water all day and ate a bunch of rice, and it was just sitting in her belly. And her burger that was not gluten-free, which, again, don't eat foods you haven't eaten all prep. Even if you're backstage and someone's like, oh yeah, my coach has me eat this. Don't do that. Don't do that.
No.
I'll say, as far as like my water manipulation goes with some of my clients, is I don't change the overall water intake the day before the show. I will say, hey, depending on what time they'll be on stage, like let's say this be on stage at 10 or 11 a.m. the next day. I'm like, okay, by 4 or 5, let's get most of your water in. Then we'll save 30 ounces from 5 o'clock until you go to bed. And then we'll bring it up a little bit in the morning with that. Just that way you're not going to the bathroom all night long and you can get a good night's sleep. The water doesn't necessarily change throughout the day. It's just the kind of the timing and the spacing of it a little bit.
I tend to what I've been doing lately is, because I do have some clients that like their average fluid intake will be like 200 ounces.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, that's too high, because there's no way on show day you're going to be able to get 100 ounces in on a 9 a.m. show, which is probably what you need on a normal day. So I'll be like, hey, let's bring your water down this week to 160 ounces, 140 ounces, which is a ton of fluids. But when we're hungry all the time, we just get in the habit of always drinking something. So if you can bring that down, that'll help. So yeah, I've even had people be like, oh, I drink 300 ounces a day. And I'm like, there's no
Too
way.
much.
Oh my God, that really
it
a job for you if that was the case. That just sounds miserable.
Well, and at that rate too, you're flushing almost every ounce of sodium out of your body.
All of it.
Right.
So yeah, that's the thing. And then that's the most common question I ask my competitors on show day is, how many times do you pee today? And they'll be like, oh, it's, 9 a.m. I peed twice. Okay. What do you normally go pee by now? Twice. Okay. Because sometimes they'll be like, oh, I peed 5 times and I just peed again. And I'm like, okay, you're going to flatten out if that continues. That's why I love the pickles. I say, have a pickle. It's about 400 milligrams of sodium. And I'll say, have another 16 ounces of water. I want to see you in 15 minutes and let's do it again. Because I want the cells swelling on show day, not dehydrating. Yeah.
Right.
Especially if you're peeled. If you're peeled, you cannot risk being flat.
No.
That is a much riskier place to be when you're shredded. Especially like if you're starting to see some striations in areas you shouldn't have them, like, shoulders and glutes for bikini. Whereas like pushing the food and the water and the sodium can really fill those muscles out so they look fuller. And that to me, like when we talk about the eye test of a competitor on stage, peeled and full is undeniable. It's an unbelievable look. You're just like, wow, the muscles look 3D, the core is tight, the skin looks healthy. That's the other thing about dehydrating. You ever look at a back pose of a female competitor and the skin in the glutes looks like saggy or like dry?
Yeah.
They're dehydrated. Those muscles push that skin out. When you pull that muscle in, that skin has got to do something. It shrivels.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot to be said. I know the judges have said this before, like, especially in a division like bikini. I think we all know that in order to get stage lean, it's not the epitome of health, right? But they always say that it should exude on stage health and femininity, right? And you could tell, like, when a competitor just looks tired or, dehydrated, or I mean, I've even seen people on stage that look like they're like about to pass out, or they just like look, very out of it, right? It's very apparent, not only to the audience but to the judges. And I think it is important to have that healthy glow to you by the time you're on stage.
Especially because we're talking about, we're talking a lot about bikini right now, right? And
Yeah.
a lot of the extremes that you hear for bodybuilding, if I do like quotation marks in that, comes from back in the day when open bodybuilding was the only category. And when you're talking about things like that, and you have people who are 285 pounds of peeled, to be able to display all of that, sometimes extreme things need to be done.
That's a
Level.
That's a different
That's a
science.
science. Like filling out someone like Nick Walker is way different than filling someone out like me, right? Completely different when it comes to that. So when you look at each division, that's why you can't coach each division the exact same. Like if you ask me to coach an open bodybuilder, I'm not going to do that. That's not my specialty on there. Now I could learn over the years to do it, but it's not my specialty on there. Everything requires something a little bit different. And for the bikini division, it is not an extreme division. So you don't need to do something extreme for something that's not extreme.
Yeah. Agreed.
And maybe I'm sure it's the most peeled you've ever been, the best you've ever looked, the hungriest you've ever been, but it is not an extreme look in bodybuilding standards. An extreme look for everyday walking around people for sure,
For sure.
but not for bodybuilding standards.
Yeah, well, there's a lot more involved in well, let's talk a little bit about the actual peaking philosophy so I coined the term linear loading, but Dr. Joe Klemczewski actually created the approach. And years ago, I was having some inconsistencies with athletes. They would look good on Tuesday, Wednesday, look flat by show day. Sometimes they would look great on show day. And I was typically loading them on Monday, and it was called a front load, and then tapering their carbs going into the show based on, what they needed. And then Friday would be a swing day, another high day, maybe another low day based on that. I could never quite capture that magic on like Tuesday, Wednesday, where they would just look perfect after that high day, sometimes the day after that high day, right? And that was the approach that Lane Norton had, kind of popularized, was the front load taper. And so when I reached out to Dr. Joe and I said, like, how do you perfectly peak an athlete? Now, so if you're not familiar with Dr. Joe Klemczewski, understandably, he's not like currently around the sport as much, but he's had over 500 people and over 100 world champions. The most decorated coach in bodybuilding. Came up with the term peak week, came up with the term flexible dieting. He's been around the sport. He should be more well known. He just doesn't really care. He's got 3 PhDs. The guy is next level. So I like talking about him because he doesn't have a lot of accolades currently in the sport. If you know the sport, like grassroots, like I do, then yeah, he was Lane Norton's coach. So if you've heard of Lane Norton, it's because of Dr. Joe. Well, not because of Dr. Joe, but like Dr. Joe helped educate him. So he came up with a lot of these concepts on his own. And when he explained it this way to me, it perfectly made sense to the point where I was like, why have I never thought of that? Like it's one of those things, like you hear something and you go, that's so obvious. How come we never thought of that? So he explained that muscle cells, simplified, are essentially balloons. And when you fill up with carbohydrates, you're filling the balloon. And then if you bring the food back down, they start to deflate a little bit, and carbohydrates bring water into the muscle, 4 parts to 1. We've all heard that part. So like the thing he always told me was water follows carbohydrates. So if carbohydrates are going into the muscle, the water is going to go into the muscle too. If carbohydrates are coming out of the muscle, the water is going to come out of the muscle. That's when we work out. We're starting to deplete those glycogen stores. So he said the way he peaks his athletes is he's constantly just gradually filling the balloon out day by day going into the show, right? In a very predictable manner. That's the linear load. And the reason I call it linear is because I typically, let's just say I have a competitor whose refeed is 180 grams twice a week. I'll start on Monday, they'll get like 100, then 120, then 140, then 160, then 180, and then I'll have a swing day of like 200 to 250, whatever. So I'm going to be a little more aggressive than I would on a normal refeed day on the day before the show typically. So that's why I call it linear, because it's like, it looks like a straight line. However, more commonly, it's probably a rapid, like you've heard the term rapid backload. That's another peaking approach that we can discuss and why it's problematic in my opinion. But that J curve at the very end where you throw food. And I'll say this, like the predictability of this approach is just second to none. It just gives me so much confidence as a coach with the daily check-ins. I just love it. But that requires practicing it. And that's another thing. We could talk about mock peak weeks too.
Yeah. And there's something I'll do with some athletes too that don't have the best digestion. Could be medical reasons, could be for a few different reasons on that, or they're just incredibly insecure about their stomach when they get food in it, and their digestion just moves a little bit slower. So some things I'll do sometimes with it, about as extreme as I'll get, is I will, if the show's a little bit later in the day, almost purposely spill them the night of the show, and they don't eat as much during show day, and then they kind of dry out throughout the day with that. Yeah. That's another way you can go about it, but it's all ends up working out the same. But that's not something you could do for an athlete that's going to step on stage at 10 a.m., right? But if they're going to step on stage at 3 p.m., which some shows do with that, they'll break up the men in the morning, the women in the afternoon, then that's an approach you could do for certain people on there. But it's still a loading process. It's not like it's like 100 grams of carbs, 100 grams of 100 grams of carbs, and then 500 grams of carbs a day before that. Right? It's not like that. It's still a linear.
That's where I find the problematic, because it's not what you just described wouldn't be as aggressive. I've seen an approach where it was 0 carbs for 3 days and then 800 carbs the day before the show. And it's not 800 carbs the day before the show. It's 800 carbs over the course of 24 hours. So you have to eat every 2.5 hours. That's the rapid backload. Now, the problem I've experienced with that, because listen, I've tried it all. I want to do things the best way. I'm not here to, stand on my pulpit and say, hey, this is the best way to do it because it's how I do it. No,
I've tried it.
When I see people have success with something, I go, what's that? I want to try it. I've tried it on myself. The problem becomes, so what I described before was, so if you do 3 days of no carbs, your muscle bellies are basically just gone. There's nothing there.
Shriveled up balloons.
Now you are trying to restore them to their max capacity and beyond in a 24-hour window. The problem there is between the food and those muscles is the digestive system, which has now been completely shut down for a couple days. So it's slower. And you're trying to push more food through it than you've pushed through it in months. A day before the most important time, no. Most often what I've seen with that rapid backload is that my client looks great on Sunday. With the linear load, you're actually helping the digestive system adapt to a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. I'll actually bring up fats a little bit too. So if they're at like 40 fats or 35 fats, I'll bring it up like 5 every other day. So they're getting a little more fat to help them, but they're not getting slammed with a 300 carb day after being at no carbs or 50 carbs for a couple days. So that to me is also another good benefit, is that you get the digestive system moving. And that's where I've seen situations like you talked about, Evan, where my athlete on a Friday will wake up at 107, eat all their food. I'll check their weight before bed. It's 107. And I'm like, okay, we got to add another meal. You're about to drop 2-3 pounds.
Yep.
And look, I've also tried it all, right? There's the theory called like super compensation audit, to where you will deplete your glycogen stores. And then in theory, they should be able to fill up larger than normal with that. I've tried that. I've had good success with it on myself on a few occasions, but I can tell you, you need more than just a day or two of that. You cannot load yourself in a day or two with that. It doesn't go well. Your digestion's going to be off. or your body's going to just burn through it.
Looks like we got a new podcast host, Spencer.
Yes, we do.
Oh my
Hello,
gosh.
Spencer.
Rubbing on the camera.
That's hilarious.
Pearl, show her up. Show him up.
Pearl's like
no,
living her best life asleep back there. That's
He's so-
funny.
Dude, he's
Oh,
like
Spencer.
22 pounds. I can't even lift him. He was about to step on the computer. I couldn't even lift him with my arm, dude. Oh my God.
How big is Rocky getting? How big is like how
I
much
mean,
is
he's just a regular cat, so he's like 6-7 pounds, but I mean,
Okay.
Spencer's literally 22 pounds. He's like
Wow.
part dog.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh.
the gentle giant. He's the
Welcome
clumsy-
to Kitty Cat Talk here. Poor little Pearl
yeah.
needs
Kitty
a
Cat.
friend. She
Everybody-
needs too much attention.
Everybody get a Maine Coon. They're great cats. Don't get me wrong, but man, they're massive. Like, yeah.
I've heard that Maine Coons are like the equivalent to like a golden retriever. Like everybody always says golden retrievers are like the best dogs. I've heard that Maine Coons are like the same, only equivalent to cats. Like they're
It
just
just
really
depends what kind of cat you want. He's not the cat to snuggle on your head.
Um,
He's always around. I'll say that. He
is.
so that's great. Spencer specifically does not love like lots of petting. Like he'll let you give him some loving, but he's always around. But I mean, yeah, they're super calm.
Oh, there's Pearl.
Oh
Oh,
yeah.
she looks so cute.
Oh, she's got the same thing that Rocky has. She has different color toe beans. Like some are black, some are pink. You ever notice that? Most cats are all the
Yes.
same color. Yeah. Yeah. This podcast just took a weird turn.
I'll title it Peak Weeks and Cat Talk.
Yeah, so I'm gonna make a video. George is here. I've been talking about doing this for a couple of weeks now. I'm literally gonna make like an not Excel, like a PowerPoint presentation of Peak Week and put it out there. I don't know. Evan, you don't ever make a video, but I just feel like no matter how much information we put out, we should be putting out more. Like it's just it should be a constant thing. Because it's just it helps athletes advocate for themselves or at least understand. I would rather an athlete not even do Peak Week than do a bad Peak Week. I'd rather them just go into the show and just do it, get shredded. If you look good on a Tuesday, do what you did on Monday and go into the show.
And honestly, I know like, okay, I remember in 2021, I kind of hopped into Tampa Pro really last minute and didn't really decide on doing it until like Wednesday. And I also know like you, Evan, you hopped into a show a couple years ago and didn't even do a Peak Week. You were just kind of ready and you're like, all right, I'm going to hop into a show. So that is a great point. Sometimes some people get away with doing that. And it just goes to show you don't have to do crazy things.
Doesn't matter. Stephanie Ortiz, who's going to Universe this week.
Yeah.
She messaged me a couple weeks ago with her update before the Clash. And she's like, hey, coach, I'll see you this weekend. I'm coming to Clash. And we were just getting ready for junior nationals. And I was like, oh, she lives in Puerto Rico. So I said, what are you doing at Orlando? She's like, oh, some of the girls from my gym are competing, so I'm going to come with them. And I was like, do you want to do the show? And she was like, you would let me? And I'm like, we're just going to do the show. There's no Peak Week. I'll give you a refeed on Friday. You do the show. She was in the middle of the overall. She got second in the overall, and the girl that beat her turned pro. So yeah, it's, if you're ready, you're ready every day. Peak Week is not this magical, going to make you do a 180-degree turn from where you're at. It should just be fine-tuning the Ferrari. You should be a Ferrari. You look like a Honda Civic on Peak Week start, you're going to look like a Honda Civic at the end.
Oh my gosh, I love that. That's hilarious. I love that. Yeah, it's fine tuning the Ferrari and keeping stress low because especially with females, I feel like a lot of females, a lot of competitors in general, we're very type A. We want to control everything. We're very high stress. And so that could definitely not work to your favor if you're too stressed going into show day.
If I could put Peak Week in this most simplest form for everyone to understand, the whole purpose of Peak Week is to decrease the inflammation in your body. That's the whole purpose of it.
Yeah. Fat loss is a very tough process. And so
it.
you're kind of always on the grind.
Yep. So a lot of time you're always on the grind, and that's time for your body to relax and come back to life. And that is done by raising food, bringing movement down, and getting inflammation to fall off. That's the whole purpose of a peak. That's it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about a few other little mechanical things of Peak Week. So what some of the common questions I get: if you got a show on Saturday, when should you get there? I will always say Thursday night if it's out of town. You don't want to be flying on Friday morning and then you've got to go get checked into the hotel, get to the check-ins, get your training appointment, go to the store to get your food, check in with your coach. Friday becomes a very stressful nonstop. You're on your feet all day. You know, the way I peak at my athletes, I like them to train the day before the show. I don't care if it's a 30-minute little circuit. I just like them to move, just be active. And also you can get a sense for how you look. Hey, did you get a pump? Right away, I got a pump. Cool. Then we're good to go. No, I got no pump. Okay. Then we're probably behind on food or water or sodium today. So with that in mind, like imagine you fly into town the day before the show and you've got to do all that stuff.
Right. And let alone like flights these days. I hate to say it, but I feel like there's so many delays nowadays. And I mean, especially if you don't have a direct flight, just like don't put that stress on you the day before the show. Yeah, I think Thursday is ideal if you can.
Yeah, always. It's like you said, Lexi, it's so much about stress management at the end. And it's, you know, that Diva Friday. I have a ritual. I actually get my nails and toes done like the 2 days before the show. I get clear nail polish, and it's for me, it's just part of that like relaxing, sitting in a chair,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know.
Well, that, I mean, I got another question. Somebody asked about working on peak week, and this kind of ties into what we're talking about. And I think, I mean, honestly, in an ideal world, yeah, if you can like take a vacation week, the week of your show, awesome. But I feel like that isn't realistic for most people. So, you know, I would say if you can at least take the day, like take Friday off of work, maybe even Thursday if you can, you know, afford to do so. I think that would be ideal. That way you can be a diva and you can relax and do all your pampering and not be stressed with, you know, work stuff on top of that.
Yeah. Obviously, we exist in a real world. We're not nobody that we know is literally just waking up and being a bodybuilder every day. That's just a very
Right.
few small portion of people. So yeah, we have to be able to manage work and all those things. And, I've even had athletes tell me that like they're not even telling their boss they're off that day. Or, like there's funny things in this sport. So you just got to work around it, but just communicate with your coach, and that may change the approach, based on, what your travel schedule is, what you're going to be doing, what your work schedule is going to be. I've had clients literally work the day of the show.
Some people I've heard some people say, like, especially if they have virtual jobs where they don't have to be in a physical location. I've heard some people say that like just doing emails and working kind of helps them to keep their stress low. So I guess if like that's your case, then it could work to your benefit. But I don't think you should put any inherent pressure on yourself to, you know, to work. But if it helps to bring your stress down, I guess that's one thing.
No, I was making fun of my client. You guys know Cheryl.
I knew you were going to say her.
Yeah.
Yep, yep. I knew that's who it was going to be.
She did the show in Boca. And then when I called her after prejudging, I was like, "Where are you?" She's like, "Oh, I'm at my office." So she was just like, I got, some of those shows where prejudging and finals are 6 hours apart. She's like, "I just drove to my office and I'm just doing some work while I'm here." But for her, that was like, she got her food and worked a little bit. So yeah, but I try to make it about you for that day. Try to really soak up show day, take pictures, meet people. Um, try, I don't know. So this is a mixed advice thing, but try not to be in a rush when the show is over. It's so much more valuable if you can talk to the judges right after the show versus emailing them, and you might never
Yeah, like
hear back.
don't make I know a lot of people do this, but I would probably not make like dinner reservations because it kind of
Right.
feeds what you just said, Paul. If you can stay back and get the judges' feedback, like you know, and if you have dinner reservations, that's just gonna, you know, you're gonna have to pick either or. So don't make dinner reservations. That way, if you can stay after for judges' feedback, that's the best
And
possible.
likewise, if your mom is in town and you haven't seen her and she's at the show, don't make her wait for feedback. So, do what's right for you. I've heard some teams like require their athletes to stay after, and, so do what's right for you in that situation. But if I treat show day like I'm there for the bodybuilders. So I want to stay there to get the most I can out of it. And that feedback, depending on who's judging, can be so valuable, right? And so a lot of the times the strategy around peak week can change when they say, "Ooh, we really liked how you looked at finals. Bring that to prejudging next time," and then you go, "Okay, cool. Now I know to be more aggressive."
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another little side note too on like show day, don't I feel like this happens more if you're doing a local show, but don't be afraid to I don't know how to put this nicely. Like I know for me in particular, if I have a ton of people that were to come to my show and want to watch, whether it's like coworkers or friends or family, for me personally, that would stress me out. And I think some people have a hard time telling their family or friends that. So like if you know that that's going to stress you out as a competitor, don't be afraid to, tell your friends or your family, hey, I really appreciate you wanting to come, but just be open with them. You have to kind of treat the day, you have to do what's going to be best for you. And I just know for me in particular, too many people in the audience there for me would stress me out. I would feel like I need to like be hanging out with them afterwards. So, don't feel bad if you, have to be, have those boundaries.
Yeah, I agree with you. I have sometimes I'll even ask my competitors, is it okay if I post your picture? Because sometimes they don't want people knowing they're competing. That added sense of like letting people down, or people messaging them. That was one of the big conversations after Daraja's first year competing as a pro and winning all those shows. All of a sudden, everyone wanted to know what she was doing. And so the next season we competed, she did not even mention prep until she got on stage, like a week out. She said, "Hey guys, I'm doing a show." So it can, if it starts to feel like overwhelming, know yourself. Don't,
Yeah, I've known some competitors who do that where like they'll have a big social media presence, but they just don't even say they're in prep. And then it's like they're 1 week out and they're like, hey, I'm in peak week. And it just helps them because they don't feel like they have that added pressure or stress on them throughout their prep.
Yeah, even last year when I competed, I mean, everyone kind of figured it out because I start to look like a skeleton, but I don't really mention a show date until it's very close, a week or 2 weeks before, because people start to treat you a little bit differently when they know you're in prep.
Yes.
They
Oh
start to,
yeah. Especially
oh, you're in prep. Oh, I don't want to bother you. You're in prep.
yes, that's a big thing with being a coach. I find that to be the case too. And like I appreciate people being courteous, but it's also like I always say, I'm a coach first. Like my job comes first. So please, like, don't ever feel bad about bothering me.
Yeah. Yeah. Honestly, I think that's one of the blessings of being in prep is being busy, right? When your mind is
Oh my
busy.
God. Yeah. Those are some of the easiest days in prep when you just have so much to get done and it like occupies your brain. So you're not even thinking about how hungry or tired you are. It's the best.
All right. I think we've wrapped up the peak week discussions. Any other like oddities or things? Just trying to think if there was.
I don't think so. I think we covered most of it. Yeah, I covered the majority of the questions I got too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think the overarching theme here is just make sure that your coach is actually, I mean, answering questions that you ask in a productive manner, right?
Yes.
Like, understanding that if they can't answer a question because of their experience, then they don't know the answer. So be an advocate for yourself. But and it's tough if you invested a lot of time with a person and you're getting down to the nitty-gritty and you're starting to realize like, oh man, not for nothing, we're here. We actually have an inquiry on our system that says urgent contest prep. So we
Yeah.
get to those really quickly because, I had a girl the other day come to me. She was like 2 weeks out and coach didn't talk to her at all on show day, just felt very kind of abandoned. And so we were able to quickly right the ship with her and feed her more. And she felt great about it. But, that's be an advocate for yourself. It doesn't hurt to, if you got a weird feeling, there's probably something behind it.
For sure.
All right, guys. Well, that's another awesome episode of the Pro Physique Code. What was the other topic we were going to talk about today, Lexi, that we didn't
Oh,
cover?
okay. So yeah, so I guess if when this comes out, if you guys are interested in hearing about this, I was gonna say we could talk a little bit about interpreting judges' feedback.
Yeah.
I think we did that topic, but it was like years ago. So I think it would be a good refresher because I definitely think that I mean, as coaches, we get feedback and we know how to interpret it, but I think it's important to maybe touch a little bit on that for competitors.
Yeah, perfect. And I'll be actually at Universe. I don't, do they do stick around? Well, I don't know. I don't know if Sandy's
I don't think
judging
they do.
this year. If Sandy's there, she stays, but I don't know if she's going this year. So we'll see. We'll see who sticks around. Etzel likes to stick around if she's there with Tyler. And if she sticks around, sometimes Tyler will. But I'll be honest, like, it's funny. People are so afraid to stick around for feedback because they think everyone's there. By the time the bikini is done, most
There's
of the
not a lot
people have
there.
evacuated the building. Sometimes the line's like 20 people. So, you
Yeah.
know, yeah.
Yeah, or the best is like when you're walking out and you just catch one of the judges like in the hallway or in the elevator and like you can grab them really quick. That's the best.
Yeah. Yep. All right, guys.
All right. Bye guys.
Great work.